Good morning, Yola. Thank you very much for coming in to talk to us. I wonder if you'd tell us who you are and who you're going to talk about today.
I'm Yola Swindells, and I'm speaking about my father, who was born in England and did his military service in England, came out to New Zealand in 1925 and lived in New Zealand the rest of his life. He, in the Second World War, was in the military reserve for the New Zealand Army.
Ah, right. So what was his name, Yola?
Alfred Joseph Swindells.
And you've got his medals there, I see.
Yes, he... When war broke out, he was in the Territorial Army and went straight into the regular army and served in the medical corps. This medal is the medical corps medal. Served in a hospital in England where soldiers who'd been wounded at the front came back to England and needed repatriation. He served in the hospital. But he was an engineer by training, so as soon as the Royal Flying Corps started, he applied to transfer to that, and he went into that, and so was in the Royal Flying Corps as an engineer from 1915 till 1919.
And then it became the Royal Air Force, didn't it? So was he a pilot as well as an engineer?
No, he was an engineer, but my understanding is that the engineers had to fly with the pilots once they had worked on the plane. And so he did that. And after the war, he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery, and I think it was due to the fact that a plane had come down. I don't know whether it was shot down or whether it came down by some other means.
Yes.
But my father came out of it with only a broken collarbone, but he evidently displayed great bravery on the occasion.
I think you'd be pretty brave even to go up in one of those little planes, because they called them crates for a very good reason. They were very fragile. And you've got a certificate there too. Do you want to hold it up to the camera?
That is a certificate signed by Winston Churchill that he was mentioned in dispatches.
So that Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, with all Sir Douglas Haig's string of letters, dated March 1919, I think. Yes. So
the third leaf on his medals represents the fact that he was mentioned in dispatches.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, is there something you'd like to read to us, Yola? How do you want to do it?
No, I think I had jotted down some of those details.
Right. So what do you remember? Do you remember him talking about the war when you were young?
Not a great deal. I have a photograph of him if you want.
Yes, we'd love to see a photograph of him. You all right?
Sorry. I would think that was when he went into the medical corps.
Right, at the beginning of the war.
And the other photo is of the Second World War when he, with his son, who served in the New Zealand Army overseas.
So that was how those wars worked. The first generation was in the First World War, and then the next generation was in the Second World War. So he didn't talk very much about the war, but he did sometimes?
Yes, I think of the support of his comrades and the work they did on the plains, how difficult it was sometimes to get the materials they needed to patch up the planes and send them out again on active service.
So did he describe what it was like to fly? Or?
I think it was somewhat terrifying. And I know that when he came to New Zealand, the thought of flying was he had a real fear.
He'd been put off.
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, I flew in a commercial plane with him the first time he ever flew again. And he was, yes, he was very nervous.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can imagine that could be the case. So what are your main memories of him?
Well, I was not surprised that he went into the medical corps because he was a very gentle man, and the thought of going into the active army to be killing people would be
not him.
Would be a real worry to him. But he was a man of great responsibility, and he would believe that it was right to play his part. His father was in the Merchant Navy. They were both born in Portsmouth, and so there was this tradition of of service. But he was a person who could be depended on very much.
Yes, and a deep sense of duty.
Yes. It was what you did to support your country.
Yes.
I often asked him, why did you fight? And he always said, I did it because I wanted my family to have freedom. And it was for the peace and freedom of his family that he felt it was the right thing to do.
Did he have brothers and sisters?
No, he was an only child.
Oh, goodness.
And so I suppose he enjoyed the camaraderie of the men in both in the army and in the flying corps.
So is there anything else you'd like to say about him?
When he came to New Zealand, he linked up with the Return Services Association and enjoyed meeting with other people who had served, although in the early 1930s there were almost no people in the town where we lived who had been in the Air Force, so it always fell to his lot to answer the toast to the Air Force at any gatherings that were held.
So what was that town that you lived in?
Whangarei.
Lived in Whangarei.
Yes.
I suppose the Flying Corps and the Royal Air Force, it wasn't that big in World War One.
It wasn't.
So he would have been a minority.
Yes, and not many, perhaps there weren't many New Zealanders who went over there to fly.
What did he do in civilian life when he came to New Zealand?
He came out as an engineer first. He was an engine fitter and turner, and so he worked at Portland Cement Works. That's how
yes, in Whangarei, yes.
Came to be there. And then the Depression came, and the people who were last employed were the first who were put off. So by that time he had 2 children, and he decided, well, I better learn how to farm. So for a year he worked on a farm, not paid, but to learn the elements of farming.
Oh, goodness, yes.
And then he bought a small property and farmed during the 1930s, and then went back to engineering at a coal mine just near Whangarei as the fitter and turner.
So an adaptable man,
Yes.
and again with a sense of duty that he
Yes,
had to
very
find
much
the
so.
right thing to do.
But while then the Second World War came, and he joined the military reserve, so he went, first it was every Sunday they had drill and exercises, and then eventually they were called up to serve within New Zealand towards the end of the war, the last 2 years of the Second World War, and he serviced army vehicles at Papakura.
Oh, right. So what effect do you think his First World War service had on him for those years?
A great desire to see the world become a better place and better opportunities for people, and the establishment of peace as much as possible. But always knowing that one must do one's duty for one's country, and he was just as happy to serve New Zealand as he had in Britain.
He sounds like a good man. He's a special man.
Yes, and eventually he came to live in Tauranga and lived here for quite a few years before he died.
Perhaps that's why the name's familiar. It was quite familiar to me. Yes. Well, thank you very much for coming and talking to us, Yola. Is there anything else you want to say? Because I don't want to cut you off.
I don't have a story of men working in the trenches, but his was a different story, and I thought I'd like to share it with you. And perhaps because he was an only child, he had, his father had seen to that he was in the Territorial Army before the war, and that was, I think his father felt that was good discipline and training, and that's why he went immediately into the armed services as soon as the outbreak of war.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Yola. Thank you. But